You don't cry about your childhood anymore. Maybe you never did, really. You moved on, you got older, got a job, built routines. You're fine. You know you're fine because you function, because you show up, get things done, answer messages, make plans. But there's this thing that happens sometimes. Someone raises their voice slightly in a meeting, and something in your body moves before your mind does. Or a person you care about doesn't text back, and you spend the next 2 hours reconstructing every recent conversation, trying to locate what you did wrong. Or someone asks you a simple question, "What do you want?" And you go completely blank. Not because you don't have an answer, but because the habit of knowing what you want was never really built. You're not broken. Nothing dramatic is happening. But something from a long time ago is still quietly running in the background, shaping the way you move through your adult life in ways you've mostly stopped noticing. That's what this is about. The first sign is something most people misread entirely. You apologize. Constantly. Not for things you've done, but for things you exist. For taking up space in a conversation. For needing something. For having an opinion that someone else didn't ask for. You say sorry before you ask a question. You say sorry after someone bumps into you. You laugh nervously before stating a preference, like you're pre-softening something about yourself before the other person can reject it. Here's the thing people usually say: you're just being polite, or you're people-pleasing. And while that's not wrong, it misses the mechanism. For a lot of people who grew up in homes where their needs were inconvenient, were being too loud, too emotional, too demanding, too much created tension, the apology wasn't a social habit. It was a safety behavior. It came before someone got angry, or withdrew, or made you feel like your needs were a burden. The apology said, "I already know I might be too much. I'm taking care of that for you." What it quietly costs in adulthood, you become genuinely hard to know. People who care about you can't actually read what you need, because you've trained yourself to shrink that signal before it leaves your body. You end up resentful, not because people don't give you what you need, but because you've made it nearly impossible for them to see what that is. The small thing worth noticing: the next time you catch yourself apologizing, pause and ask, did I actually do something wrong here, or am I managing someone else's potential discomfort? That 1 second of clarity won't fix anything immediately, but it makes the pattern visible. And visible patterns are the only ones you can actually work with. The second sign is harder to recognize because it looks like a strength. You are extremely self-sufficient. You figure things out yourself. You don't ask for help easily. When something goes wrong, your first move is internal. You try to solve it, absorb it, or push through it before the thought of reaching out to someone even registers. People notice it and say you're capable. You are. But that's not quite the point. For some people, radical self-sufficiency wasn't chosen. It was formed in environments where needing help created problems. Where asking meant being told you were too sensitive. Where leaning on someone and being let down enough times eventually made the message very clear: figure it out yourself. And so you did. You got very good at it. And now you carry that skill like armor you forgot you put on. The quiet cost is that intimacy has a ceiling. Real closeness requires some degree of need. It requires allowing yourself to be helped, witnessed, carried occasionally, when that capacity is walled off. Not out of coldness, but out of something closer to a very old learned caution. Relationships stay at a certain depth, and don't go further. The people around you might feel like they can't get all the way in. You might feel that distance and not know why it's there. The third sign is one of the most commonly mislabeled things on the internet. You have a very short emotional fuse in specific contexts, and in other moments you feel almost nothing. This isn't a personality type. It's not that you're an emotional person or numb. What's often happening is something more specific. The feelings that were safe as a child got practiced, and the ones that weren't got compressed. In many homes, anger was allowed, even modeled, but vulnerability wasn't. Or vulnerability was somewhat allowed, but anger was frightening or punished. So you learned which emotional channel was acceptable, and you narrowed yourself into it. Now, in adulthood, you might find yourself getting disproportionately irritable about small things: the wrong tone of voice, a slight sense of being dismissed, a plan that changed last minute, and underneath that irritability is something much quieter: fear, sadness, a need that doesn't have language yet. The irritability is often the only thing that got out. Or you notice the opposite. A genuinely difficult situation happens, and you feel strangely flat. Not stoic. Flat. You go into logistics mode. You make lists. You do not feel what the situation seems to call for. And later, sometimes weeks later, something small and unrelated breaks the surface of it, and you're surprised by how much was sitting underneath. Neither of these is a character flaw. They're both signs that the emotional system was shaped under conditions where the full range wasn't safe. The fourth sign is, one, people rarely connect to childhood at all. You have genuine difficulty resting, not sleeping, resting, being still, sitting in a quiet room without filling it, taking a day where nothing is being produced or solved or improved, and actually letting that be fine. There's almost always a pull toward being useful, toward output. The weekend comes, and instead of an actual pause, you somehow end up reorganizing a closet, or answering emails you could have left, or taking on a project that wasn't necessary. Busyness can become so habitual that stillness starts to feel vaguely threatening, like something unpleasant will surface if the noise stops. For some people, this connects to childhood environments where love or approval was conditional on performance, where being good meant being helpful, productive, impressive, low maintenance, where existing quietly without achieving something didn't feel safe or didn't feel like enough. The body learned, keep moving, keep doing, prove something. The cost isn't just burnout, it's a kind of chronic exhaustion from never actually landing. You arrive at the weekend and leave it still carrying the same low-grade tension, because you were busy instead of rested. And rest is the thing you actually needed. The fifth sign is the one that shows up in your closest relationships, and often gets blamed on other people. You test without meaning to. Someone is kind to you, and instead of receiving it fully, some part of you is waiting for the condition attached to it. Someone says they love you, and the next time they're mildly annoyed with you, you interpret that as evidence that the love was always uncertain. You push, subtly, to see what happens. You pull back to see if they follow. You expect people to leave, not consciously, but in the way you position yourself. Never quite fully in, one foot slightly toward the door. The misconception here is that this is about the other person, that you keep choosing unavailable people, or that you're unlucky in love, or that your standards are wrong. Occasionally, those things are true, but often the pattern is that you learned, in formative years, that closeness and pain came as a package, that people who were supposed to be safe could shift without warning, that love had a version that felt stable and a version that didn't, and you never quite knew which one was arriving. So the protection isn't cruelty, it's preemption. Get far enough ahead of the loss that when it comes, you're not caught off guard. The problem is that living in that position is its own kind of loss, because the closeness you're protecting yourself from is also the thing you're trying to have. If this one lands, one thing worth sitting with is this: can I tell the difference between a genuine signal from this person and a pattern I'm applying to them? Not always, but sometimes, and that distinction matters more than people realize. The sixth sign is the quietest one, and it's the one that shapes everything else. You don't fully trust your own perception. Someone treats you in a way that felt wrong, and then you spend 3 hours deciding you misread it. A situation clearly made you uncomfortable, and your first instinct is to make a case for why it wasn't that bad. You notice something about a person, a dynamic, a situation, and then almost immediately you question whether you're being too sensitive, too suspicious, too much. This often comes from environments where your perception was regularly corrected, where you said "I'm sad" and were told you were fine, where you said "that hurt" and were told you were dramatic, where the emotional reality you experienced was not reflected back to you or was actively rewritten. And after enough of that, you learned not to trust the original reading. You learned that your gut was probably wrong, and that other people's versions of events were probably more accurate than your own. Now in adulthood, you outsource your perception constantly. You ask people what they think, you wait for external confirmation before making a call. You second-guess yourself in ways that seem like thoughtfulness but are actually something older, a very practiced habit of not trusting yourself. The cost is significant. Decisions take longer than they need to. You stay in situations longer because you're not sure whether they're actually as bad as they feel. You trust other people's comfort with something over your own discomfort with it. This one is worth taking seriously. Not as a diagnosis, but as a question. When I override my own first read of something, what am I basing the override on? Sometimes new information is genuinely useful. Sometimes you're just automatically deferring to old conditioning. None of these signs are permanent conclusions. They're patterns, which means they have shapes, and shapes can be seen. The work isn't to excavate your childhood or turn every adult behavior into evidence of a wound. The work is quieter than that. It's the noticing. The moment before the apology, when you catch yourself and ask why. The pause before the deflection. The small decision to let someone help you with something instead of managing it alone. The choice to sit in a quiet room for a few minutes and not fill it. What's worth correcting, because the internet gets this wrong constantly, is the idea that these signs mean something is fundamentally wrong with you. They don't. They mean something young in you, adapted to something hard, and that adaptation has stayed past the point where it was needed. That's not failure. That's a system doing what systems do. What changes things isn't identifying the signs, it's getting to know the function. What is this pattern protecting? What does it think will happen if I do this differently? Those questions, asked honestly and not answered in a hurry, are where the actual shift lives. One last thing, and this matters. If any of what was named here is landing in a way that feels heavy, and you're not sure what to do with it, please talk to someone. A therapist, a counselor, someone trained for this. This video is for reflection and education, not professional help. And some of what gets uncovered in this territory is worth exploring with real support, not just a screen. But the fact that you recognize these things in yourself, that's not nothing. It means something is ready to be seen. That's usually where it starts.